the invisible regret, a truth they'll never admit. You were never truly seen by them, were you? Not in the way that mattered, not in the way that said, I won't run when you get close. You gave them warmth, you gave them grace, and what they gave in return was distance. But here's what no one tells you. Some people mourn you in silence. They grieve not with tears, but with avoidance, with distraction, with shame. And though they'll never say it out loud, they regret losing you, but they'll never hand you that truth, because to do that, they'd have to face themselves, and that's the one thing they've been running from their whole lives. You see, regret isn't always loud. Sometimes it's buried deep beneath detachment, underneath pride, underneath a nervous system trained to shut down before it gets hurt again. Their silence wasn't peace, it was paralysis. And the day they lost you was the day they added one more name to the list of people they couldn't hold on to. But you still remember every detail. You remember how present you were, how much you listened, how you didn't just offer them love, you offered them safety. And when they left, you questioned your own worth instead of questioning their capacity to receive it. But let's get brutally honest. This wasn't about you. It never was. They were already halfway gone the moment your presence asked them to become emotionally available. You didn't trigger their anger, you triggered their unprocessed wounds. Their discomfort was not caused by your affection, but by the mirror your affection held up to their emotional neglect. You were not too much. You were the invitation they were too afraid to accept. They didn't abandon you, they abandoned what was real. But you know what makes this harder? They'll never say sorry. They'll never tell you that they think about you when the noise fades. They'll never text at 2 a.m. saying, you were right, I wasn't ready. Because people who regret deeply and silently also carry too much pride to show it. They'll convince themselves that you were the problem, just so they don't have to face the fact that they sabotaged something real. But every so often, when no one's around, and the dopamine rush of their distractions wears off, they'll remember you, the way you loved, the way you stayed, the way you made them feel like maybe they were worth loving. And the ache won't go away, because that kind of care doesn't come around often. They didn't lose you because they didn't care. They lost you because your presence required them to evolve, and they weren't ready. People leave not when they stop loving you, but when staying means they have to change. They may have left you, but they didn't leave unchanged. Your absence is now part of their story, a memory filed under, I wish I had handled that differently. They regret not showing up. They regret avoiding the conversation. They regret ghosting the one person who truly saw them. But they won't tell you that, because to admit that they lost something real would be to admit that they were the reason it ended. And ego doesn't like accountability, especially when it comes wrapped in regret. They regret it, but they'll hide it behind silence. So, instead of texting you, they'll scroll through your page in the middle of the night, quietly watching the glow return to your eyes. Instead of apologizing, they'll try to convince themselves you didn't matter that much, while secretly comparing everyone else to you. You won't hear it, but their regret is loud in their solitude. They'll meet new people, start new things, laugh in new places, but behind every I'm fine is a memory of how you made them feel without trying, and nothing will ever quite measure up. You were the moment they never expected, the lesson they never wanted to learn, and when life finally quiets down for them, when the distractions run dry, and they're forced to sit with their choices, you will resurface, not as someone they hate, not even as someone they blame, but as someone they miss, because deep down, they know they lost something good, and they're too ashamed to admit it. Why they push away what they secretly want most. They said they weren't ready. They said it wasn't the right time. But what they didn't say, what they couldn't say, was that you touched something inside them they didn't know how to face. You awakened a truth they weren't prepared to live up to, and so they ran, not because they didn't care, but because they cared more than they knew how to handle. Let that sink in. Because when people are afraid of being seen, truly seen, they don't lean in, they retreat, they shut down, they deflect, they begin looking for reasons to push you away, even as part of them longs to be pulled closer. Love for them isn't peace, it's danger, not because you were unsafe, but because your presence made it impossible for them to keep pretending. You were the contradiction. They wanted love, but they were terrified of receiving it. They wanted connection, but their nervous system had been wired to equate intimacy with pain. So, when you stayed, when you showed them consistency, grace, and real affection, they didn't know what to do with it, because in their world, love always came with conditions. Love was always earned. Love always left. Real love felt unfamiliar, so they mistook it for danger. You see, some people have spent their entire lives protecting themselves from abandonment by abandoning others first. It's not conscious. It's a survival strategy, a deep-rooted, subconscious contract that says, if I push them away now, I won't have to watch them leave later. And you were safe, you were kind, you didn't weaponize their pain or manipulate their vulnerability. But that made you even more frightening, because safe love requires presence, it requires honesty, it requires a person to see themselves clearly, and if they've built their identity around not being seen, your love becomes a threat, not a gift. They didn't push you away because you were wrong for them. They pushed you away because you were too right. Some people run not from you but from the version of themselves they have to become to love you properly. Think about that. You offered softness, and they responded with silence. You offered emotional intimacy, and they responded with distance. It's not because they didn't feel something. It's because they felt everything and didn't have the tools to hold it. This is what trauma does. It builds walls and calls them boundaries. It creates escape plans and calls them independence. It avoids eye contact and calls it stoicism. But really, it's just fear wearing 1,000 different masks. Fear of being loved is still fear. And here's what you must understand. You didn't fail them. You didn't say the wrong thing. You didn't come on too strong. You triggered their capacity for transformation, and that terrified them. You stood for everything they secretly wanted, and everything their fear couldn't tolerate. So, instead of rising to meet you, they pulled away. They choose comfort over growth, avoidance over vulnerability, control over surrender. And what's tragic is, they think they won. They think they dodged chaos. They think their silence saved them. But in time, they'll realize they didn't save themselves. They just abandoned their only chance at something real. You were the bridge they refused to walk across. And now they keep you at a safe distance, pretending they've moved on, pretending they're fine. But there are songs they can't listen to, places they avoid, phrases they can't hear without being pulled back into your presence, because regret is quiet, but it's relentless. It shows up when the distractions fade, when the new relationship lacks soul, when the thrill of detachment starts to feel like emptiness. You'll never hear them say, "I wish I'd stayed. I wasn't ready, but I should have tried. You made me feel seen in a way no one ever has." No, they'll never say those words, but they'll live them, they'll carry them, and they'll be haunted by them, because unspoken regret is still regret. And the truth has a way of echoing, especially in silence. You didn't lose them. They lost themselves trying not to lose control. They'll remember you, not just in the quiet hours, but in moments when they crave depth, when they realize everyone else is performative, transactional, surface level, and that you were real. They'll laugh at someone else's joke, but they won't feel it in their bones. They'll hold someone else's hand, but it won't calm their nervous system like you did. Because your presence was medicine, and now they're left with the aftertaste of something genuine they couldn't hold on to. This is what regret feels like when you can't go back. What regret feels like in silence. You won't hear them say it, but that doesn't mean they're not thinking it every single day. Regret is rarely loud. It doesn't arrive in the form of a phone call or a confession. It seeps in quietly, when the noise dies down, when they're alone, when the distractions wear thin, when the mask starts to slip, because no matter how hard they try, they can't unfeel what you made them feel. They can pretend, smile in photos, go out with someone new, but their nervous system remembers. Their subconscious remembers the way your presence made them feel safe, held, known, and it's that memory that haunts them now. Regret isn't always loud. Sometimes it whispers through your heartbeat. There's a special kind of ache that comes from realizing you pushed away the one person who truly understood your silence. Not just your words, but your silences, your sighs, your hesitation, the way your voice cracked when you talked about your childhood, the way your walls crumbled when they felt safe. You were the one who read between the lines, the one who saw behind the bravado, the one who offered presence instead of pressure. And now they feel the absence like a bruise, like a shadow that follows them through every almost connection, every near miss, every lukewarm conversation, every hand they hold that doesn't feel like yours. They try not to remember, but the body keeps score. Their body remembers you, your voice, your rhythm, the peace you brought into chaotic spaces, the way your gaze disarmed their armor without demanding they explain themselves. Some people live with regret in their chest because they refuse to live with love in their hands. Let's go deeper. Why can't they forget you? Why can't they move on even if they look like they have? Because your connection wasn't based on need. It was based on resonance. You didn't beg. You didn't manipulate. You didn't perform. You just were. And your beingness was a healing they weren't ready for. They don't miss what you did. They miss who they became in your presence. They miss the version of themselves that smiled without calculation. The version that let their guard down, that felt worthy just by existing. You reminded them of who they were before the world told them to hide. Now they don't know where to find that version of themselves again, because it was only in your presence that they felt whole. And you think they've forgotten. You think they're fine, but their silence isn't peace. It's disassociation. It's emotional withdrawal dressed up as maturity. It's the adult version of hiding under the covers and pretending the monster's not there. They feel it in their nervous system, in the awkward quiet of morning, in the loneliness between parties, in the way they keep checking their phone for a message they don't even want to answer, because answering would mean admitting the truth. They wish they'd stayed. Regret doesn't always say I miss you. Sometimes it says nothing and hopes you'll say it first. Here's what they won't tell you. They watch you, not out of obsession, but out of longing. They see your glow return. They see your softness returning for someone else. They see you laughing again. And it hurts, because it means you've moved on from a place they're still emotionally stuck in. They scroll past your posts, not because they don't care, but because they can't afford to feel everything at once. They're afraid one glance might undo the emotional dam they've built. One image might bring the whole lie crashing down. They thought you were replaceable, not because they believed it, but because they needed to believe it, because the truth that you were once in a lifetime was too painful to carry. So they pretend, they overcompensate, they throw themselves into new relationships, new routines, new identities. But there's always a crack, a moment, a pause in the day when everything stops, and you come rushing back, not as a memory, but as a feeling, that feeling of being held, being understood, being safe. They didn't lose you once. They lose you again every time someone fails to love them the way you did. Here's the truth. They are not fine. They are just practiced. They have rehearsed indifference, perfected silence, mastered the performance of having moved on. But every performance ends, and when the curtain drops, it's your name that echoes in their empty room, because your love was real, and nothing real can be erased by avoidance. How your absence becomes the mirror. There's a power you don't realize you hold. Not in your presence, not in your effort, not in the love you gave so freely, but in your absence, in the space you left behind, in the quiet after the noise, in the distance that no apology can cross. Because here's what no one tells you. Sometimes your silence is the most honest mirror they'll ever face. They didn't notice when you stopped calling. At first, it felt like freedom to them, a release, a breath of relief. But the silence grew teeth. It started to whisper things their ego couldn't drown out. It said, they're not chasing you anymore. You don't live rent-free in their mind anymore. You're no longer the center of a universe you once took for granted. That silence started to sting, because it didn't mean absence. It meant reflection. Your absence became their teacher. You weren't gone. You just stopped trying. You stopped proving, stopped shrinking, stopped waiting. And in that stillness, they were left with only one thing: the truth, their patterns, their avoidance, their inability to rise. They blamed you for being too much, but now they're haunted by how little they gave. They told themselves a story, one where they were the mature one, the emotionally unavailable, glorified loner. But now, your growth ruins that narrative, because while they stayed stagnant, you evolved. You took your pain and you didn't numb it. You transformed it. You didn't collapse. You rebuilt. You turned that heartbreak into wholeness. You didn't become colder. You became clearer. They expected you to fall apart. They expected you to chase, to beg, to try just one more time. But instead, you walked away, with dignity in your silence, with fire in your belly, with a deeper understanding of who you are. And that's what breaks them now. Not your anger, not your confrontation, but your complete emotional detachment, because they don't know how to fight someone who's finally free. They remember the softness in your eyes, the steadiness of your love, the loyalty that never asked for attention, but always stayed. And now, they see you smiling again, not because of them, but despite them. And that's when regret becomes a prison, not for you, but for them, because you moved on, not just externally, but internally. You upgraded your standards. You rewired your nervous system. You stopped romanticizing inconsistency. You stopped craving their chaos, and that's when they craved your calm. Let's be honest, you were addicted to their absence once. You measured your worth by how quickly they responded. You hoped every silence wasn't a goodbye. You tolerated breadcrumbing just to feel like you mattered. But no more. Now, you are the one who is unavailable. Not because you're playing games, but because you've outgrown them. You're not chasing, not hoping, not wondering. You're not rehearsing conversations in your head, not checking if they viewed your story. You're no longer trying to decode silence, because your peace speaks louder than their confusion. The one who detaches in silence holds more power than the one who leaves in noise. Now, their mind replays every moment, not the big arguments, but the quiet ones. The way you used to look at them, the way you believed in their potential, the way you spoke life into places they'd buried long ago. They miss not just your words, but your presence, your energy, the way you created space for their brokenness without asking for it to be fixed overnight. You saw the child in them and treated them like they were still worth loving. And that is what no one else has done. They're with people who want their surface, not their depth. They miss how you reached for their soul, even when they didn't believe they had one. They didn't fall in love with your appearance. They fell in love with how your presence healed them. But now you're the one who is hard to reach, not because you're bitter, but because you've built boundaries around your sacredness. And every time they consider reaching out, they realize they're no longer qualified to access your energy. They didn't just lose a partner, they lost a sanctuary. They lost the one person who made healing feel safe. They lost the only version of love that didn't ask them to pretend. And you're not angry anymore. You're just unavailable. Emotionally, spiritually, energetically. Not out of revenge, but because you now understand something deeper. The real win is becoming someone who no longer begs to be chosen. So here you are, not broken, not bitter, but better. You laugh, you asked, you learn it, and now you lead, not with pain, but with clarity. You've stepped into the rarest kind of power, emotional maturity, energetic alignment, spiritual closure. And as for them, they regret losing you, but they'll never say it, and you'll never need to hear it, because your healing no longer requires their confession. You're already free. If this spoke to something you've been carrying silently, don't hold it alone. Drop a comment below. Tell your story. Someone out there needs to hear it. Subscribe for more depth, more truth, more healing. Share this with someone who needs to remember their worth. You are not crazy. You are not too much. You were just the right kind of soul for the wrong kind of person. But that changes now.